Qualitative data is not the easiest thing to work with. It doesn't fit into nice little neat boxes or tables or even categories sometimes, and it can be inherently frustrating. It can be the biggest pain in the backside, and it can often be enough to have you thinking, oh, I wish I would have tried harder to understand statistics, to get my head around the quantitative stuff, because that would have been so much easier. Well, unfortunately, it's a bit too late for that, because you've got the darn data now. We just need to figure out what you do with it, and that is what we're going to be looking at in this video. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Yardley, and I've been supporting postgraduate and doctoral students for the last 20 years. I've also done a lot of qualitative research myself, so I know exactly how it feels to be completely overwhelmed when it comes to writing up your findings chapter. But I've also learned a few tips and tricks along the way about what to do and what not to do. Here they are, and we will get into them in a moment, but before we do, I just want to say this is the second in a 4-part video series about all things findings chapters. The last one was about whether or not you should refer back to the literature in your findings chapter. So if that is a burning question that you have at the moment, check that out. It's up here, and I'll also link to it in the description. The next couple of videos after this one, I'll be looking at quantitative data. What on earth do you do with that? And then in the last video, I'll be looking at what to do if you have mixed methods data, if you have both quantitative and qualitative data. So make sure you stay tuned for those videos if those sound like the kind of thing that you need at the moment. The first piece of advice that I would give to anybody who is about to write up a qualitative findings chapter is be prepared for mess. Be prepared to get messy. It is not a linear process. You're not going to have perfection right out of the gate. It's going to take you a few attempts to write this chapter up. We are not living in the land of make-believe here. You are not simply just going to write your chapter on the first attempt. It's going to take you a few goes to get it right. It's not an easy chapter to write, and it's not supposed to be easy. So be prepared for mess. Mess is to be expected. The structure of your chapter, the level of detail that you go into, it will change. You will put things in, you will take things out, you will move things around, you will put things back in that you had previously removed, and it's all part of the process. It's easy to get incredibly frustrated with a qualitative findings chapter and just be like, oh, when am I ever going to finish this damn thing? And it can feel like you are having to just scrap it all, erase it all, start from scratch over and over and over again. But it's important to understand that you are not starting from scratch if you're writing something for the second time or the third time or the fourth time. It's all part of the process, because with every iteration of your findings chapter that you produce, you are getting closer to the final version of it. So please don't expect to get it right straight away. You're going to go through various versions of it. You're going to get really frustrated. You're going to get really messy, but just please be assured that that is all completely normal. Okay, so if you are in a mess with your qualitative findings chapter right now, it's fine. The second piece of advice I'd say to anyone writing up their qualitative findings chapter right now is don't put all of your data in there. You've got to be selective. You've got to be strategic about what you choose to include. And it helps to think about your findings chapter as a highlights reel. Okay, it is a highlights reel. It is not an Amazon warehouse in which you just cram absolutely all of your qualitative data. And I can fully understand why people want to include everything in their findings chapter, because you have worked really hard to collect this data and to analyse this data. You want to show it all off. You're like that excited child at show and tell who goes along with a whole bag of toys rather than just one. That is not what we're aiming for here. Okay, we don't want to bombard and overwhelm our examiner with absolutely all of our data, because that conveys that we're not confident in our understanding of it. That conveys, oh my goodness, I just have to just put it all out there because I'm not quite sure which bits of it are important. So be strategic, be selective, don't just throw it all in. And remember, there is always the appendix, okay? If there is some data that offers a little bit more detail, that kind of expands on something that you're talking about, that offers a bit more in the way of evidence beyond what you've given in the chapter, you can always refer the examiner to the appendix, okay? So always have that in mind. Could I put this in the appendix? Is it absolutely necessary for me to include this in the chapter itself? So to avoid cluttering up your findings chapter, the appendix is always one option. But there is also another option that you should consider too. So if you have some really interesting data that is kind of related but not massively relevant to what it is that you've been looking at, but you just so want to show it off, you so want to put it somewhere, why not write a completely separate paper about it? Save it for a publication, a journal article, a book chapter in and of itself. There is a tendency, as I've said, to just want to shove everything into the findings chapter because you worked hard to collect it, you want to show it all off, you want to say, hey, look what I did. But that's not appropriate for your PhD, okay? You have to be really focused in your findings chapter and only show the stuff that is helpful in terms of evidencing your arguments, in terms of showing the examiner what you've done. So use the appendix. Think about the option of writing a completely separate piece of work about it as well. Now, the third piece of advice, having said all of that stuff about making sure that you don't clutter up your findings chapter, is that you need to include enough so that your examiner can see how you reach particular judgments or how you reach particular conclusions. So you need to be transparent. And when you are including evidence to support your arguments, make sure that you are including evidence from across your sample. Don't just include stuff from the good sources or the good participants, because we've all been in that situation, haven't we? When we've done a piece of qualitative research and we've had this one participant who has just given us absolute gold, and their quotes and some of the things they said are just like marvellous. And we are just so tempted for our findings chapter to be completely dominated by the stuff they say because we want to just include all the stuff they say. But that is not representative of your entire sample. Okay, so make sure that you are drawing evidence from across the sample, from across your different participants, from across different sources of data that you've collected. One thing to look out for when you are trying to be transparent though, is to ensure that you are not overdoing it, that you're not going to overwhelm the examiner. So if you've got a really juicy quote from a participant, get my words out today, do you need to include all of that quote, or could you just include some of it? Could you summarize some of it and then just include, say, a sentence or a couple of sentences? So you need to strike the balance here between transparency and between examiner overwhelm, because you don't want your examiner to kind of feel completely bombarded by all of this stuff that you're including. So strike the balance appropriately. My fourth piece of advice is that the data does not speak for itself. What I've come across in a lot of qualitative findings chapters are these kind of random quotes that are just kind of left there hanging on the page, and there's no explanation of them. There's sometimes not even any reference to them. And as an examiner, that is really frustrating. That is really annoying. So please do make sure that when you are including evidence from your data to support your arguments, that you're actually explaining to the examiner what it means. You don't want the examiner to come across something and just be scratching their head like, well, what? So what? Your examiner shouldn't feel like they have to interpret the data. Okay, that is your job. You are the expert now. You need to walk them through it yourself. Refer to it, comment on it, analyse it, explain what it means, and here are some phrases that you can use to help you do that. The fifth piece of advice I want to share is don't fudge the data. Now, I know that all of you watching this would never in a million years do this, but I thought I would just throw this in just in case you have a friend who has a tendency to do this kind of stuff. So don't fudge the data, don't misrepresent your findings. Maintain your integrity as a researcher. Your findings should authentically reflect the data that you've collected. And it can sometimes be tempting to be quite selective in terms of what you include in the findings chapter, in terms of what you include in your analysis itself. And you don't want to be just ignoring or forgetting about particular pieces of data that are inconsistent with some of the other stuff that you're saying. Don't just forget to include stuff that doesn't fit with your interpretations. One of the hallmarks of qualitative research is its ability to capture the richness and the depth and the complexity of the human experience. So it is not uncommon to encounter stuff that doesn't really fit, that seems to contradict other stuff that you've come across. When handled thoughtfully, these contradictions and these mismatches, they can become really valuable findings themselves. They will give you a treasure trove of new insights. Take the time to delve into the reasons behind these divergent views and these divergent experiences, because asking the how and the why questions can give you some really nuanced understandings. Piece of advice number 6 is to stay ethical, because the very nature of qualitative data, of qualitative material, throws up a whole host of ethical issues. You'll have things like quotes in participants' own words or extracts from particular documents or records, and those things can be really powerful in bringing your analysis to life. These things can be really useful in terms of substantiating your judgments or your conclusions. And when you include that kind of data in its raw form, it can be incredibly compelling, it can be incredibly personalised and very powerful, but you need to be super careful with this. Because often the level of detail that a participant shares with you, or the level of detail that you're able to get from a quote or an extract from a document or a source, can lead to individuals being identified, and that is not ethically okay. So you need to weigh up how much of their content do you want to include in your findings chapter to maintain their anonymity, to maintain your ethical integrity. So you might not want to include all of a quote that they've used, because that can lead to other people knowing who they are. You might only want to use part of that quote. You would obviously want to be using pseudonyms and that kind of thing as well. So just be really careful when you're including that kind of data in your findings. Is it really necessary to include all of that? It's not, basically, is the answer to that, if it is going to compromise the anonymity of your participants. And sometimes this can be hard because you might have a quote or an extract that is massively valuable for your findings chapter, but the level of detail in it is such that it could lead to your participant being identified. So in that instance, you cannot include that. Okay, you have got to take that out. You have got to find another way of conveying the meaning that came across in that particular contribution to your research. And that is your job. That is what you as a researcher have to do. The last tip that I want to share with you is to present your qualitative findings chapter well. Make sure that it is structured and labelled and presented in a way that makes it really easy for someone to read it, that makes it really easy for your examiner to understand it. They shouldn't be wondering, like halfway through your findings chapter, like, oh, what's going on here? You know, so it needs to be presented in logical sections. You also need to be careful in terms of how you are presenting your data. So you need to be labeling things like quotes properly. So putting a participant's pseudonym at the end of a quote, you should absolutely be doing that. You shouldn't have any quotes, any extracts that are just there with no indication as to where they have come from, because the examiner has to be able to read across your findings chapter. You might have included several quotes, and it's essential that the examiner can identify where a quote has come from the same person. So if you have a quote in the first section of your findings chapter from one participant, and that same participant, you've used one of their quotes later on, the examiner needs to be able to know these things come from the same person. Okay, it sounds like quite a minor thing to label your quotes with a pseudonym or a participant number, but it's massively important because it is hugely helpful for your examiner. Also, make sure that you very clearly distinguish any extracts or any quoted material from the main body text of your findings chapter. So if you have a lengthy quote, you need to indent it, you need to start it on a new line, you need to make it clear this is something from a participant or this is something from a source, because there is nothing more frustrating than reading a findings chapter and you're like, okay, is this from a participant or a source, or is this something that the student is saying, that the candidate is saying? One of the things that really kind of gets on my wick, shall we say, is when you can't make that distinction. And one of the most common errors that students make is with speech marks. So if you've got a short quote from a participant or an extract that's only like a couple of lines long, so you've incorporated it into the main body of your text, and there is a missing speech mark, like you know where the quote begins, but you don't know where it ends. Does it end? Does it ever end? You know? So missing speech marks, massively annoying, not just for me, for other examiners too. So please make sure that you proofread, that you go through, that you can read your findings chapter from an objective point of view and see that makes sense. Okay, this is easy to read. This is not going to be frustrating for someone reading it. So to summarise, these 7 key things that you need to watch out for when you're presenting your qualitative data in your findings chapter are: so firstly, expect mess. This is not an easy, simple, linear process, and that is absolutely fine. Secondly, don't just chuck it all in. Be strategic, be selective about what you include. Thirdly, be transparent. Include a sufficient amount of data to show the examiner how you reach your conclusions, but don't include so much that you overwhelm them. Fourthly, don't just have data that is hanging around in your chapter. Make sure that you refer to it, that you comment on it, that you analyse it, that you tell the examiner why it's important. Number 5, don't fudge or misrepresent your data. Embrace the opportunity that qualitative data offers you to uncover the richness and the complexity of the human experience. Number 6, stay ethical. So be really careful when it comes to things like anonymity and the other ethical principles guiding your research. And lastly, present it well. And we're done. I hope you found that helpful, and stay tuned for the next video in which I'll be talking about the common issues with presenting quantitative data. I hope to see you there.